It all started with this magazine spread, which I first saw in 1980. I was enamored by the idea of a miniature garden with real dirt and real plants growing in it. And because it's never too late, and inspired by Eileen Hull's new Garden Gate die, I'm doing it. I'm finally making this miniature garden that I've waited my whole life to make. Come, let's make it together. The magazine's original instructions say to use 2 disposable foil pans, which you would fold together to make one tray. I used these foil cake pans from Walmart, and I put them together with the long sides touching. I cut the corners where they meet and folded those sides together. I used extra sheets of aluminum foil to cover those seams. This bamboo cutting board from Walmart fits perfectly as a base under the garden, and it will make it much easier to move it around. This frame is actually a stretcher, which artists use to stretch their own canvases. It works perfectly for this, and it's super affordable. I flipped the aluminum trays upside down, and then I stapled the edges to the stretcher frame. I filled the bottom of the trays with gravel for drainage, and then I topped that with potting soil. I trimmed the curved ends from popsicle sticks and then glued them around the inside perimeter of the stretcher frame. And this will give me a surface to glue the fence to. I left the area where the gate will be open. I used Eileen Hull's new Garden Gate steel roll die to cut the fence. One side of the die cuts the gate shape, and that's the part that I'll use for this project. I cut a whole bunch from chipboard. I cut most of them down to be a low fence. I used my paper trimmer to make sure they were all cut evenly. The paper trimmer will only cut through halfway, and so I just flipped it over, carefully lined it up, and then trimmed it again. To make the corners, I'll slice through the picket vertically, just through one side, and that makes a nice clean bend. I glue the sections together, matching them up to the perimeter to figure out the placement. For the gate posts, I glue a few of the taller pickets together. I painted a few coats of gesso to the entire length of the fence, front and back, before gluing it to the perimeter. To make the hinges, I added clear packing tape to black cardstock. This will do 2 things. First, it will make the hinges look like they're made from shiny black metal. And secondly, it will reinforce the hinges. I used Eileen Hull's steel rolled die journal hardware to make the hinges. And I cut 2 of these pieces. I folded it in half, and I think that's a good length for these hinges. To attach the hinges to the gate, I used Brad's and Beacon 3-in-1 glue. I had an idea that I could make a potting shed out of this half and half carton. After I removed the cap, I was able to push this part in. I trimmed the top part of the carton where the roof pitch will be. I added masking tape all around the carton. This will be a better surface for gluing than the waxed carton. Next, I marked and measured where I wanted to cut the door. I'm going to use a die to make the windows. So I'm using the die that cuts the aperture out as a template to draw where I'll want to cut the windows. and I'll put a window on both sides of the potting shed. Using an X-Acto, I carefully cut along the lines for the doorway. I'll keep the left side attached to act as the door hinges, and I use an X-Acto to score that area to allow the door to open easier. And then I use a straight edge to fold it back. The carton was still wet inside from when I rinsed it out. I covered the door with masking tape inside and out and then along the cut edge. To cut the windows out, I used an X-Acto to cut an X from corner to corner diagonally, and then I used scissors to cut it out. I made sides for the shed from watercolor paper that I cut to fit each area. I used a Tim Holtz embossing folder to give the sides a realistic siding texture. I had to run these panels through twice, lining it up first at the bottom and then turning it around to run it through from the top of the panel. To line up the placement of the window, I placed the panel against the side of the building. And then I accessed that area through the window opening opposite to draw that window outline. Then I used the die to cut out that window shape. This process flattened the embossed effect, but that's not a problem. I just ran it through with the embossing folder again. I made door panels also out of watercolor paper. I didn't want to use the same embossing folder to add a wood effect, but I did want the doors to look like wood. So I scored about every 1/4 inch vertically. And then for the outside of the door, I added strips of paper horizontally and diagonally to give it the look of a barn door. For the roof, I used corrugated cardboard, and I peeled off the top layer. I folded it in the middle to make the pitch of the roof. And when I paint this with silver paint, it will look just like corrugated metal. I added trim pieces around the door and along the sides of the building. These were just strips of watercolor paper. Adding these pieces really helped make the shed look more finished. I painted this shed with chalk paint that I had left over from another project, and I think the color is perfect. I painted the door brown, and then I went over that with 2 different wood tints for variation. I painted the roof first with gray, and then with metallic paint. Next, I cut a piece of chipboard to fit in the bottom as the floor, but before I installed it, I made wood flooring using coffee stirrers. I used miter shears to cut them at different lengths, and then I glued them in place, and then stained them. Next, I added a knob to the door. I used a crocodile to punch a hole, and then I set the knob in place with the screw backing that it came with. I added a piece of patterned paper to the back wall of the shed. I made this little desk or shelf from popsicle and coffee sticks. I added supports to the wall to help support the shelf and to give a little surface to glue it to. I cut the window shape with a die using watercolor paper. I also cut out shutters using the same die set. I'm going to use 2 layers of shutters and then glue them together to give it some heft. I'm also going to use 2 layers of the window on the outside. I cut a rectangle of acetate for the glass in the window. I knew I wouldn't be able to keep this acetate clean, so I just scratched it up a little bit to make it look intentional. I painted the shutters a dark red color. It's much easier for me to paint these separately and then add them to the building. I painted the window frames a beige tone. I glued the acetate to the window frame, and then I adhered that window in place. I added the painted shutters to either side. And then I finished by gluing the inside frame, trying to be careful to line it up just right. I wanted to make a miniature pegboard for the area above the desk inside the potting shed. I used a 2-inch square to cut a piece of adhesive-backed fun foam, and then I used the same die to cut a piece of wood paper. This is wood veneer paper made from real wood. I used this die from Sizzix. It's meant for paper embroidery, but I think it makes the most perfect grid for a pegboard. For the pegs in the pegboard, I used sequin pins. I pushed them in, and then on the back, I trimmed off the excess with wire cutters. I made a clipboard from craft paper. The finished size is about 3/4 of an inch by 1 inch. I found this perfect paper in a paper pad, which I think will be just the right thing to go on the clipboard. I placed 3 in a little stack, and I staggered them a bit so that you can see a little of each. I used this jewelry finding for the top of the clipboard. I held the papers in place, and then I used pliers to close the clamp onto the papers. I'll also add some miniature tools to the pegboard. I got this set, all of them together, from Amazon, and I think they're wonderful. I wanted my potting shed to sit securely in the garden. I didn't want it to topple over, so I added stakes to the bottom. These are wooden picks used to tell the doneness of grilled steak, but I think they work well for this. To make a couple of garden hoses, I used this coated wire that I had. The writing on it can be removed with nail polish remover. I used these tiny beads to fashion a nozzle for the hose. I used my scissors to help me strip the plastic from the wire, and then I was able to thread the beads in place. I wound some thread around the other end of the hose, and I think it looks like the hose connection. I used acrylic markers to paint the hoses. I used a gold metallic marker to make the ends look like brass. Finally, I added a coat of Mod Podge to make the hoses shiny. When I saw this fun, mossy wire at Hobby Lobby, I thought it would make a great wreath. I found something round that was about the same size that I wanted my wreath to be, and I wound the wire around it. This wire came with tendrils attached to it that were not wired, so I cut a length of that and I used that to go around the wreath to add body. I thought I would make a tiny nest to go in the wreath. I took a bead and I wound some thin twine around the bottom of the bead, using glue to hold it in place. I pulled some of the twine apart and then glued that to the outside of the wreath to add texture. I left the nest to dry completely on the bead, and then I carefully peeled it off. For the eggs in the nest, I used pearlized stamen. I used this die set to make a birdhouse. I measured and folded a piece of craft paper to be the sides of the birdhouse to make it three-dimensional. I used the pieces from the die to make the front and the back of the birdhouse. I rolled up some craft paper to make the perch. I glued 3 layers of the front together to give the perch more support. I glued the birdhouse to the top of a dowel. I added a roof piece to the top of the birdhouse. I painted the birdhouse with acrylic markers. I made a doormat to go in the front of the potting shed. I used this die set, and I used the part that is intended to be a window above the door. I cut it from black cardstock 3 times, and then I glued those together. I finished it with a thick coat of Mod Podge, and I think this looks like ironwork. I pieced together corrugated cardboard that I covered with dark paper to be a skirt to go around the bottom of the garden to disguise the aluminum foil pans. I used plastic strips to help me make the shape of the path, and then I put some sand down. My son and I took a trip to the nursery where we picked out some small plants for our miniature garden. We shopped the section of the nursery that was for bonsai trees and for terrariums, and we found some great small plants there. I added small pebbles to the garden path. I stuck in a toothpick to serve as a doorstop. I want to keep this door propped open. The tree was leaning, so I added a bamboo skewer. I really wanted to try and plant rows of seeds like the Inspiration Garden. I made plant markers from shrink plastic, and these really do have the names of the seeds that I'm planting here. check back to see if I can get these seeds to grow. And there you have it, my dream garden finally come true. I hope you enjoyed watching this project come together. If I've inspired you to make a miniature garden, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching.